My name is Thomas Grayson. I'm 62 years old. I live alone in a simple little house in Missoula, Montana, and I drive a 2001 Impala that already knows more road than a lot of people out there. But tell me something. What would you do if you had $40 million in the bank and no one knew about it? No. It's no joke. I had this money for decades, hidden, not even counting my own children. Do you know why? Because I wanted to see who really loved me. Who would be by my side even when they thought I had nothing? The truth is that what hurts the most is not poverty. It's being treated as if we were invisible, as if our value were measured by clothes, cars, addresses. And that's what my children did to me. They called me an outdated old man. They left me out of parties, decisions, family. But this story's not just about heartache. It's about patience, about keeping every word crossed, and in the end, about turning around without having to raise your voice. If you've ever felt like you've been judged by your appearance, stay with me until the end. You will understand what happens when a beggar reveals the truth. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. There was a day when my two sons, sitting at my table, called me a shame. They laughed at my old car, at my simple food, at the house where I lived for more than 20 years. Little did they know that every penny of that meal, every brick of that wall, and every nail that kept that home standing, it was supported by $40 million that I had quietly built up for 4 decades. And that night, that same night, they humiliated me. I already owned the houses where they lived, but they didn't know that yet, and when they knew, well, I'll let you see it with your own eyes. Now, if you've ever felt the bitter taste of ingratitude, if you've ever been judged for what you seem to have and not for what you really were, then this story is for you. Give me the honor of your company in this rant. Leave your like if you can and subscribe here, not only to listen, but to show that we are not alone when the world insists on forgetting those who built everything in silence. I remember that night as if it were today. The smell of meatloaf was still in the air when I turned off the oven, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe that this could be a fresh start. I had spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen with my shirt rolled up and the radio down, preparing exactly what they liked when they were children: very creamy mashed potatoes, warmed bread, simple dessert. It was nothing sophisticated, but it was done with care, with love. While setting the table, I used the best tablecloth I had, the one left over from the wedding with their mother. I thought to myself that maybe, just maybe, sitting together again would be enough to break the ice that had formed between us over the years. When I heard the sound of the car coming, I went to the window. It was not the common engine noise. It was almost silent. A rented Tesla, glowing in the dim light of the streetlight. I saw Scott leave first, sunglasses even though it was already night, and right behind Madison with an expensive coat and cell phone in hand. The two looked at the house as if looking at something strange, out of place. Madison wrinkled her nose before she even knocked on the door. At that moment, something inside me tightened, but I took a deep breath. I opened the door with a rehearsed smile. "Come in, children. Dinner is ready." They came in, but not with that way of someone who returns home. Scott looked around, noticing the old furniture, the paint a little peeling near the window. Madison ran her fingers through the bookshelf and then wiped her hand discreetly on her pants, as if she had touched dust. They sat at the table without saying much. I served the dishes, trying to strike up a conversation. I asked about work, life, how things were. The answers came short, impatient, until Scott laughed and nodded out. "Dad, do you still drive that old car?" He spoke as if he were talking about something shameful. "My friends saw us coming. It's hard to explain." Madison completed, stirring the puree unwillingly. "Seriously, Dad, you live like this because you want to. Peter takes us to amazing restaurants. Just last week it was $100 per person dinner. And look at this." She gestured around the table. "It seems that time has stopped here." That hurt more than I expected. It wasn't the comment itself, it was the tone, as if I were a mistake that needed to be corrected. I continued to eat slowly, almost without tasting the food. They spoke of their stepfather with admiration, telling of trips, business, plans. I listened in silence. At some point, Scott said something that stuck with me. "It's hard to have a father like that, you know. It gives a bad image." Image. That word echoed inside my head. I, who spent sleepless nights to pay for their college, became a bad image, an embarrassment. There was a moment when my hands trembled slightly as I held the fork. No one noticed. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. I looked at the two of them sitting there, so tidy, so full of certainties, and I felt a loneliness that I can't explain. It's that loneliness that comes when you're accompanied but not seen, when everything you have been seems to have no value at all. I paused the conversation inside, in that silence that only we feel, and I thought about how many fathers and mothers out there must feel this way, invisible within their own family. If you've been through this, if you've ever felt that tightness in your chest, that feeling of being diminished by the one you loved the most, write something simple in the comments. I've lived it, or it's true. Sometimes, knowing that we are not alone already relieves a little. I returned to the table as if nothing had happened. I cleared my throat, forced a smile, and said that the important thing was for them to be well. Madison raised an eyebrow as if not to believe it. "Dad, you should think about improving your life. At least get a decent car." That was the last shovel of dirt that night, not because I couldn't, but because I realized that for them, I was no longer a father. It was a poorly finished project. When they finished eating, almost without touching dessert, Scott stood up and said they needed to go. They didn't even thank them. Madison only said, already at the door, "We'll talk to each other." The car left the front of my house as quiet as it arrived. I stood there, looking at the empty street, feeling the cold of the night enter slowly. I went back inside, collected the dishes almost intact, and sat alone at the table. It was there, in that simple kitchen, that something changed inside me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, but I decided to keep every word, every look, every contempt, because unbeknownst to them, that night had only been the beginning, and I still hadn't told the truth. In the days that came after that dinner, I tried to go about my routine as if nothing had happened. I woke up early, heated my coffee on the old stove, read the printed newspaper that I still insisted on subscribing to, and walked to the hardware store where I worked for 30 years. Nowadays, I no longer have a schedule or function there, but I still stop by to have a coffee with Carl and Ben, two colleagues who grew old by my side, among screws, boards, and silences of tired men. It was on one of those mornings, sitting at the counter with a mug in my hands, that I heard the first cross question. "What's up, Thomas? The children so well. I never saw you with them again." I smiled weakly and replied as usual, "They are fine. Yes, busy." But inside, every time someone asked, it was as if they rubbed salt on an open wound, because the truth is that the children were out there. They just weren't there for me. I started to notice social media more, something I didn't do much before. I took my simple cell phone, entered their accounts, and saw what I already suspected. Madison posted photos smiling next to Peter, the one who was once just my ex-wife's boyfriend, and who was now treated like a father. In one post she wrote, "Family is the one who is truly present." Those words, they hit me like a punch in the chest, because if there's one thing I went to, it was a gift. I was the first to arrive at the hospital when she was born. I was the one who stayed awake with her when I was afraid of the dark. I was the one who sold my vacation 3 years in a row to pay for her prep school. And now, there, I was just the absent one. The disposable. Scott was also not far behind. Photos of trips, dinners, toasts, captions like "with real family" or "gratitude for those who really care." There was not a single mention of me. None. As if I had been erased. As if the man who carried them both on his shoulders in an amusement park who taught them how to ride a bike, who cried hidden in the store's bathroom when he couldn't give them the gift they wanted, had never existed. These comparisons began to devour me inside. It was impossible not to remember each sacrifice, from Christmas when I ate bread and butter alone because all the money went to their gift. From the nights I sat on the couch until late, waiting for them to come home from college, just to have 5 minutes of conversation. And now, what was I? An old portrait kept in a drawer? One afternoon, in line at the market, I met Mrs. Dunbar, an old neighbour, who looked at me tenderly and said, "You know, Thomas, I always see his children with that elegant man, Peter. Are you okay, honey?" I smiled with the politeness of someone who has already gotten used to hurting without showing it. "Yes, I am, Mrs. Agnes. I'm at peace. But peace is a curious thing, because sometimes it's just the absence of noise, and the silence that, yes, screamed inside me." I returned home that day and sat on the porch, watching the sky darken. I reviewed in my head the plays, the school meetings, the diplomas I paid, the painful hugs in divorce, everything I did for love, and all I got back was silence, exclusion, and oblivion. I wondered where I went wrong. Does loving too much create this kind of distance? Could it be that when we give everything, we lose value? But it was there, on that balcony, with tired eyes and even more soul, that an idea began to form. It was still just a whisper inside my mind, but it already brought with it a different taste, not of revenge, but of justice, because maybe they needed to feel what I felt. Perhaps for the first time, they had to live without the invisible comfort they had always had because of me. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was just going to wait for the right moment. And it was at that exact moment that the phone rang. An unknown number, a voice on the other end of the line, an unexpected request that would change everything. But this you will understand in the next chapter, because nothing, absolutely nothing, of what came next was by chance. The phone rang late that grey afternoon, and when I saw my ex-wife's name on the screen, my first impulse was not to answer. But I answered. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of hope, maybe because we still keep that remnant of love that we never quite know where to hide. Her voice came hard, cutting, without a single high. "What you did was embarrassing, Thomas. My children left their house embarrassed. You have no right to expose them like that." I tried to understand what she meant. I asked calmly, "Exhibit in what way?" And she continued, "Inviting them to dinner in that depressing house, with that simple food, with that way of yours. You just showed how much you still live like a failure, and that falls on them." I was quiet for a few seconds. On the other side, the silence was impatient. "They have an image to look after, Thomas. You should think about it before you draw attention to yourself like that. If you can't offer something to match, it's best to keep your distance, even to avoid further embarrassment." I didn't respond immediately. I took a deep breath. I felt my jaw clench. It hurt, but not like a stab. It hurt like tiredness, like the moment when we understand finally that no one will come to rescue what is left of us, that the consideration ended a long time ago, and the only thing left was the deadweight tag. The next day, Scott called me. The call was dry, direct. "Dad, the engagement is going to be in Aspen next month. Just one thing. I'd rather you didn't come. Or if it comes, please try. Improve your appearance a bit. I don't want Jenna or her parents to get a bad impression." I asked in a calm voice. "Impression of what?" He replied, "The kind of father I had. It's not personal, just image, you know?" Image! Again that word. The same one used by Madison. The same one that had already crossed me days before. But there it sounded different. It sounded like a sentence. It was official. I was no longer welcome, not even with blood, not even with a memory, not even with love. I hung up without arguing. I went to the closet and stood looking at my shirts. Ordinary cotton clothes, bought in modest stores, worn shoes but clean. my winter coat with patches made by myself. I thought they expected me to put on a mask, rent a suit, fake wealth, just so as not to embarrass anyone. Funny, when they were children, they went out in torn shorts and slippers, and I thought they were the most beautiful things in the world. I never cared about appearance. I cared about the smile. Today, their smile is expensive, and I, who could afford it, wasn't even invited to try. There, in front of the closet, I said a single word. Understood. Because I really understood. I understood that it wasn't about clothes. It was about value, about respect, about memory. And that for them I was no longer worth anything. He was just the old man in the old car, the old house, the outdated life. But what they didn't know, it's that who decides what is old or not. It is time. And time that, yes, was still on my side. And I prepared myself for something they would never imagine, because all I had left now, it was choosing the right moment to reveal the truth. And when that moment came, he didn't come with screams. He came with papers, with numbers, and with a silence that echoed, "Do you want to know how it went? So follow me." Because that's where the story starts to turn. There are things that we carry inside and no one knows. They see me today in this old coat, driving a car that should have been in a junkyard by now, and they think life has defeated me. But what they don't know is that each button of this jacket carries a choice. Every scratch on the steering wheel of my Impala is a reminder of how far I've come, not to show off, but to build something that would last. While many of the men my age were in the bars, laughing out loud and spending the week's salary on 3 nights, I spent the early hours sitting in the kitchen with a cup of thin coffee and a stack of financial newspapers. I learned there, on my own, to understand the ups and downs of the market, the charts, the codes, the reports. I remember as if it were yesterday the day I bought my first IBM stock. I was 22 years old, and I was just a skinny boy with calloused hands and stubborn eyes. I bet $100, the value of a weekend off, because I believed that tomorrow could be better than today. From then on, I never stopped. Every extra hour I did at the hardware store became an investment. Each commission that came in, I divided. A part for the bills, another part for the children, and the rest for the future. Linda, my wife at the time, said that I was obsessed with numbers, that I should live longer and worry less. But what she didn't see is that everything I did was so that one day they wouldn't have to go through what I went through. I didn't want luxury. He wanted stability. I wanted a solid home, up-to-date bills, and peace. That peace that only exists when we sleep, knowing that everything is fine at the end of the month. I sacrificed travel. I never took my children to Disney, but I guaranteed their study without depending on a scholarship. I never wore an expensive suit, but I paid for Madison's prom dress without paying in installments. I didn't eat at a fancy restaurant, but I left hot food on the table every day. I went to the ground, the firm ground on which they stepped fearlessly, and now I was treated like the carpet. Sometimes I found myself remembering the notes they left me when I was little. "Love you, Dad," scribbled with colored pencils. "You're my hero." One day I found one of these notes inside an old book on finance. It was from Madison, with shaky lyrics saying, "When I grow up, I want to be like you." Funny, right? She grew up, but he forgot. There is something that few people understand. Sometimes the most difficult wealth to conquer is not that of the bank. It is the emotional one. I built a fortune without anyone knowing. But I lost the respect of those who mattered most, and yet I went on in silence, because I knew that the true value was not in what I showed, but as far as I knew. By the way, I'm here opening my heart, telling this story with my chest half open and my soul half tired. If you're still with me so far, if this story is touching you in any way, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I still have a lot of things in store to tell you, and trust me, there are things coming that even my children don't dream of, because it was at this stage, between memories and sleepless nights, that I began to prepare what no one expected. Can you imagine what happens when a rejected father decides to use his own silence as a shield and his own fortune as a sword? So just wait to see what I did after that cold coffee, because when silence becomes a strategy, the tables are starting to turn. That week was made of silence. A silence so thick that at times it seemed that even the clock on the wall had stopped out of respect. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't go to the store. I didn't answer anyone. He just walked slowly through the short corridors of the rented house, with his laptop resting on his arms, looking at the same numbers day after day. There they were, 40 million, comma by comma. A number that grew like a tree planted with patience, watered by sacrifice and pruned by difficult choices. Most people would be ecstatic to see that, but I looked at it as if looking at an unsent letter, a feeling kept for too long. Sometimes I would sit on the edge of the bed and think, all of this could be an inheritance, it could be future, it could be a bridge. But is it? I began to wonder if they ever really saw me, or if they have always seen only the usefulness, the provider, the facilitator, the yes guy. On the living room shelf, a photograph stared at me every day, mercilessly. It was old, taken in a state park in Idaho. Scott was still small, sleeping on my shoulder. Madison held an ice cream, her eyes shining with joy, and beautiful. Well, Linda was still my wife at that time. In that photo, we were a trio, a family, a team. I stared at that image for so long that at one point I started to ask myself quietly, where did I lose them? Because something broke along the way, and I didn't even realize when it was. Maybe it was in the little things. In the I'll see later, in the I can't now, in the times I accepted to stay in the background. I always thought that love could handle everything, that it was enough to do the right thing, but it seems that it is not enough. I didn't cry. There were no tears. It was a dry emptiness, a grip that does not flow, but that suffocates slowly. Sleep, difficult. When the body tires, the soul agitates. And at night the mind speaks loudly. He talks too much. I began to remember conversations, forgotten laughter, promises. Madison said I was the strongest man in the world. Scott said that when he grew up, he wanted to work with me. And now I was the source of their shame. Around 3 in the morning on a Wednesday, I was still awake, walking around the house as if looking for something that he knows he will not find. I walked through the kitchen, bumped into the wooden chair that creaks whenever someone sits down. I sat down anyway, and there, in the dark, with the laptop on the table, I opened the statement again. I looked at all those investments, Apple, Microsoft, shares of companies that are now giants, but that, when I bought them, no one believed. I believed it. I studied. I calculated. I insisted. And now that was mine. It was power. But for the first time in my life, I asked myself, for whom? For what? What hurt me the most was not even the rejection. It was waste. Of everything I could have been for them. Of everything he could still teach, show, split. But they didn't want to. They didn't want to know where I came from or how I got here. They wanted distance. They wanted silence. So I decided they would have silence, but not in the way they imagined, because within my silence a decision grew, and it was not small. I still didn't know exactly how, but I began to understand that if they despised the simple man, maybe it was time to meet the whole man. And this discovery, this one would come without warning, no ad, but hard enough to shake everything they thought they knew about me. Have you ever wondered what happens when a betrayed parent stops waiting and starts acting? So listen to me, because that's exactly when I started planning the first move. It was a cold night, one of those when the wind seems to have teeth and the whole house crackles under the weight of silence. I was there once again, with my laptop open, my cup of coffee forgotten on the table, my body present but my mind miles away. Only this time something was different. There was no sadness. There was calm, and within this calm, something grew, a kind of clarity that only silent pain can bring. I closed the statement with a firm click. Those numbers were no longer just numbers. They were tools. They were possibilities. I opened the browser and started typing slowly. The fingers still knew the way. I entered the public property records of the state of Colorado and then Montana. I looked for my children's addresses. Scott's, in a modern building in Denver, gated community, mirrored glass facade. Madison's, an elegant duplex in Bozeman, with a gourmet balcony and 2 parking spaces. Both properties, curiously, were registered in the names of holding companies, but it was not difficult to cross-reference the data. It only took 20 minutes to understand that Scott's building had an outstanding legal debt, financing stuck, seizure process triggered. Madison's duplex? It was for sale discreetly, through a shell company. I closed my eyes and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not that smile of joy, but that of those who see, finally, the complete board. The next morning I made my way to downtown Missoula. I walked into a small law firm, specializing in quiet takeovers, and sat down with the lawyer, a middle-aged woman I had known since the days when she still rode her bike on those streets. I took the printed data, like in the old days. 2 proposals, direct and discreet. I said to her in my firm voice, "Buy them both. No name of mine anywhere. Use the Wyoming holding company, everything clean." She looked at me surprised, but didn't ask anything. He only replied, "Let us take care of it, Mr. Grayson." 48 hours later, I received confirmation in the email. Proposals accepted. Transfers initiated. And there, sitting in the same chair where I had so often wondered what to do, I knew. I was the new owner of the building where my son lived, and the apartment where my daughter was on top of the world. They didn't know, and they wouldn't know, not yet. You know. It's strange how, sometimes, a gesture of silent power can heal more than 1,000 excuses. I didn't want to humiliate them. I just wanted to put things in their proper place, not with words, but with position. Because there are times in life when we need to stop trying to understand and start letting the world understand us. At the right time, in the right silence. And look, if you've come this far with me, I'll tell you something that comes from the bottom of my chest. Keep going. Don't give up on this story now, because what's coming, it will show that sometimes the one who seems weak is just someone who has not yet shown everything they have. I closed the laptop that night as if closing a cycle. For the first time, I slept peacefully. And when I woke up the next day, my step was already different. The old man in the old car had ceased to be a supporting actor, and the first move was already made. But you know what's more curious? The next day, an unexpected email arrived in my inbox. It was Scott's. And that was the message that tied the next knot in history. Do you have any idea what he wrote? Well, I read, and I didn't believe it. Scott's email was short, to the point, almost impersonal. A request, or rather a veiled demand. "Dad, can you please not comment to anyone about the situation of my building? The administrator warned us that there will be an adjustment in rents. I'm trying to negotiate with them, but any comment from you, even unintentionally, can complicate things." Deal. I read that about 3 times, not knowing whether to laugh or whine. He thought I was still a spectator. An old man who only observes, who talks too much, who can get in the way. I had no idea that the old man here was the owner of it all. That same day, I contacted the administrator of both properties. I made sure to keep my identity completely confidential. I asked that the highest correction index allowed by contract be applied. Nothing outside the law. No malice. But it was time to cause a little instability, just enough for them to feel, for the first time, what it is like to have the ground moving under their own feet. The company acted quickly. Within 2 days, the notifications were sent. A considerable increase in rent, nothing that a good financial reserve could not cover, but I knew they weren't all that prudent. They lived in luxury, but on the edge. The next morning, I received a call from the administrator. Madison had called. Desperate. crying. He said that it was an abuse, that he would have to leave the property if he could not negotiate. I asked the employee to be cordial, but firm. "It's company policy," she replied. I just nodded. Hours later, Scott appeared in person at the administration's office. It was harsh. He threatened to sue, demanded to speak with the owner. The attendant said that the owner's identity was protected by contract. He left slamming the door, spitting out words that I would rather not repeat. And I, from afar, just watched. You know, it was not pleasure that I felt. It was justice. It was like seeing the hands of a clock finally aligning. They were feeling for the first time what I felt at that dinner table, when they take away your dignity with words that seem small but are knives, when they make you feel invisible, out of place. It is curious how life sometimes takes silent turns, turns that no one hears, but that make noise inside the soul. There, seeing the two lost without knowing where the blow came from, I understood that I did not want to punish them. I wanted to teach, show the value of things, to show that respect is not bought with appearances nor with expensive dinner. And if you, who are listening to me now, have ever felt this pain of being left aside by those you raised with so much love, comments below. He says, "I understand you," or "I know how it is," because only those who have passed know. And we recognize ourselves in silence. That night I lay down lighter. I knew the game had begun, but he also knew that what would come next would be even more profound. Because fiddling with your pocket is easy, really hard. It is to move the heart. And that's why the following week I prepared something that didn't involve money. But that would change everything. Want to know what it was? So get ready, because the next card was different from everything. The news spread faster than I expected. In small towns like Missoula, everything becomes a matter of the bakery table, the mail line, the whispering at the market. Did you hear that Scott Grayson is leaving that luxury building in Denver? They say Madison is giving the duplex back. It seems that the rent has tripled. I listened silently, feigning surprise, while inside I felt an old weight dissolving. It was not revenge that I felt. It was a kind of poetic justice. Life finally returning what was played carelessly. Scott tried to hold the situation tooth and nail. He even sent a letter to the administrator, offering part of the property in exchange for a discount. The proposal was denied, of course. I myself had already made it clear with the legal team, no negotiations. The policy is standard for all tenants. He tried to sell the car, cut expenses, but it was too late. The lifestyle he maintained depended on appearance, not sustenance. And when looks don't pay the bills, she charges. Madison, on the other hand, went straight to her mother. He called Linda, crying. He asked for help, begged. But the very powerful Peter, the new father, was facing a crisis in the construction company. Cuts, lawsuits, drop in public contracts. None of this they posted on social networks, of course. The mask of success was still there, but behind it, the hole was deep. And the stepfather, who had once been the source of everything, could now barely afford his own costs. It was then that I realized something curious. For years, I was the one who lived in fear of being absent. I did the math in my head before buying a different bread, before going out of budget with a dessert. I was always worried about whether I would have enough to support my children with dignity. And now, they were the ones who felt this pressure in their chests. This anxiety of those who don't know if they will be able to stay under the same roof the following month. I sat on the bench at the hardware store, as I always did, and was silent for long minutes. The coffee got cold, friends were talking, and I only thought of a phrase that hammered in my head. Life turns, and sometimes it turns slowly, but it rotates. The most impressive thing was that no one knew anything. Neither did Scott. Neither did Madison, not even Beautiful. Neither did Peter. For all of them, I was still the old man in the old car, the man in the cheap rent, the dead weight of the family. Only now I was the owner of the fence. And they were surrounded. And you know what surprised me the most? How much all that made me feel. No problem. I didn't want to see my children living on the street. He never wanted to. I just wanted them to understand that they felt in their skin, even if for a short time, what it is to walk carefully, what it is to be afraid of losing the ground. Because only when we lose comfort is that he learns to value those who were sheltered. I remember one afternoon in particular. The sky was closed, it was windy. I went to the post office, and there I met Mr. Allen, a gentleman who knew my little children. He looked at me gently and said, "Thomas, I heard about Madison's struggles. Are you okay?" And I replied with a discreet smile, "Yes, I am, just watching life teach." He frowned but said nothing. Perhaps he understood, maybe not. But I knew what I was saying. And it was in that same week that something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at my house. Handwritten, simple envelope. The sender? Madison. When I saw my name written in that letter that I would recognize even with my eyes closed, I felt something inside me tremble. I opened it calmly. I read every line. And what she wrote to me, it was the first step of something that no one saw coming. Do you want to know what was written? So get ready. Because this letter was the beginning of a turning point that even I didn't expect. Madison's letter smelled like stored paper, those sheets that stay in a corner for too long before being sent. It was short, 2 pages. She wrote saying that things were harder than they seemed, and that she was tired. He talked about rent, debts, anxiety. But what touched me the most was a phrase at the end. "Sometimes I wish I could go back in time, sit in that kitchen and eat meatloaf with you again." I read that line about 10 times. The kitchen, the cake, me. It was the first time in years that she had mentioned it as a good thing. Perhaps even she did not realize the value of the phrase. But for me, it was like a sign. It was there that I decided that the lesson needed to be complete. It wasn't about money. It was about memory. About rescue, about truth. If my children could no longer see what they were really worth, maybe it was because the world I gave them was too easy to accept and too difficult to understand. The next morning, I opened my investment brokerage and began the partial liquidation process, actions that he had carried for decades. I remember as if it were yesterday the day I bought Apple stock for less than $10 from Microsoft when it was still just a promise. And Amazon, when no one bet on a book-selling site. There, with a few clicks, I turned decades of patience into $20 million available. Do you know what it's like to see 20 million appearing on a screen on an ordinary morning, sitting on a wooden chair with a mug of cold coffee by their side? It's seeing your whole life saying, "You did it, even alone, even if I was silent." With the money in hand, I did what needed to be done. I went to the registry office and transferred the properties to my personal name. No more holdings, layers, or disguises. Now it was Thomas Grayson there, printed in capital letters on the property records. When someone looked for the owner of Scott's building or Madison's duplex, my name would be there, wide open, but it was not yet time to tell. The lesson still needed to mature. The pain was still on the surface. And I knew that you only really learn when the wound starts to itch. So I remained silent, observing, waiting. On the other side, I heard the noises. Scott sold the luxury watch. Madison put the designer bag on a resale site. They tried everything to keep up appearances. But she no longer had makeup to hide the crack. For the first time, they were not in control. And for the first time, I was. And you know, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Sometimes we just need to feel that we are not alone, even when we are. It was that same week that I received an unexpected call. Beautiful, their mother, and her voice, different, almost smooth. But there was something hidden behind that tone. Something I never thought I would hear from that mouth again. Can you imagine what she asked me for? Well, I heard, and I had to hold myself back from laughing, but also so as not to cry. Linda's voice on the phone came too sweet. That sweetness of someone who is not asking, is preparing the ground. "Thomas, I was wondering if you can help the boys. They have some problems. You know, they're trying to get by, but—" I let her talk. I wanted to hear how far I would go, and he went far. He asked me to talk to someone influential in the administrator to alleviate the increases. He said it would be good to maintain the harmony of the family. Harmony. That word hurt me more than any silence. I just said, "I'll think about it." And I hung up. Not angry, but with one certainty: I needed to go to the end. That same day, I went to Billings and met a man recommended by an old acquaintance from the hardware store, Ray Donovan, former police officer, specialist in family and corporate fraud, the kind of man who sees in the dark. I told him what I wanted: truth, cool, clean, without flourish. I wanted to know everything my children were hiding, everything they could tell me, but they chose not to tell. Ray did not promise speed, but he promised accuracy, and he did. In less than 2 weeks, he called me back to his office and handed me 2 envelopes. Inside, more than reports, revelations. Scott was being investigated by the company where he worked. I had presented cold notes, lunches that never happened. Over time, that was not done. Nothing that was still in court, but HR was already moving. Madison, in turn, carried 3 silent processes. Customers accusing her of having omitted serious problems in the houses she sold. Structural cracks, leaks, hidden mold, and everything signed by her. I took the papers, read each line calmly. He was not angry. He was cold. Because there, in front of me, there were not only mistakes, but standards. Repetitions of what I had already felt at dinner, in the ignored messages, in the forced smiles. They weren't just financially lost. They were distancing themselves from everything I once tried to teach. And look, I know this is sounding heavy, but there's something I need to tell you with an open heart. The most memorable moment in this story is yet to come. What happened next? No one expected it. Neither do they. Neither did I, and that's what makes it all worth continuing until the end. I closed the reports and kept them in a leather folder that I always carried with me. It was like carrying inside the shards of a truth that hurt me. But I was also preparing, because now I didn't just have wounds. He had proof, and I was going to use them, not to destroy, but to teach. And who knows, save what could still be saved. On the way home, I looked out the bus window and found myself thinking, would they one day be able to look at me and see what I really am? A father who failed to be seen, but never failed to love. And if they weren't, would it be worth showing anyway? This doubt accompanied me to the door of the house, and the next day, a letter from their lawyer arrived. And then, my friend, everything started to get out of control. Do you have any idea what was written? I read, and I understood that the game was going to change for good. Their lawyer's letter arrived folded into 3 with the stamp of a pompous Denver office. I read each line slowly, savoring the cynicism hidden between the lines. They claimed concern for the emotional well-being of their children in the face of the instability caused by the recent rent adjustment. They asked, in the name of good family life, that I reconsider. It was almost comical. It's sad, very sad, because anyone who reads a text like this, coming from their own children, quickly realizes it was not born from the heart. It was born out of convenience. But what turned me inside out was not the letter. It was the second envelope delivered by Ray Donovan that morning. Inside, 2 documents with my name on them, but not signed by me. One was a business credit application, completed by Scott. In the personal reference field, he put my full name, my phone number, and more. He said that I was his partner and guarantor. Lie. Cold. Official. The other was a vehicle registration made by Madison, a car she said she had sold, but which, when investigating, was still with her driving in Bozeman. In whose name? Thomas Grayson. Me. I held those papers with a trembling hand. I sat down slowly. I looked again. It was no longer about ingratitude. It was emotional theft. Betrayal with signature. They used my name, my history, my existence as a shield, like a ladder. And I asked myself, when did I stop being a father? And I became a tool. I swear to you, there I felt the knot in my stomach that neither Linda's words, nor the contempt at dinner, nor the forgotten posts had caused. Because when someone doesn't love you, it hurts. But when someone pretends to love you just to use you, it breaks something inside. I sat there for a time that I don't even know how to measure. The sound of the wind was banging on the window, and a memory invaded me without warning. Little Scott, waiting for me to arrive from the night shift, running with a drawing in his hand. "I made it for you, Dad." And Madison, lying on the couch, asking me to read for the 1,000th time the story of the green frog who became king. It's strange, isn't it? How some memories stick to us. How can something as simple as a children's drawing or a voice asking for a story, it can cross decades and still beat hard in the chest? If you are listening to me now have a memory like this, tell me in the comments. Something that never left his head. It may be small, silly, but it stayed. Sometimes these details are all we take. But going back, that day after rereading those reports, I understood that silence was no longer enough. I needed to go further, not out of revenge, but for truth, for justice, because if my own children had the courage to falsify my name, I did need to show my name, but in the right way. And it was then that I made a decision unlike anything else so far. I contacted an old lawyer friend, and he said, "I want to prepare everything, registration, confession, hearing, and I want it to be public." He looked at me for a few seconds on the phone and asked, "Are you sure?" And I replied, "I do. Now, they will have to look at me, even if it's in front of a judge. Can you imagine what I have prepared? Because what I'm going to tell you in the next part, it is the time when the truth ceases to whisper." And he starts screaming. I woke up early that day. I put on my shabby plaid shirt, the threadbare brown coat on my shoulders, and ran some water through my thinning hair. It was not vanity. It was silence. It was presence. I took the 8:15 a.m. bus to Bozeman and got off 2 blocks before the real estate building where Madison worked. The street was busy, cars coming and going, windows cleaned, people in a hurry. I entered without announcing it, as any customer would. I looked around, modern chairs, fragrant reception, ambient music. She was sitting in the background, typing something on the computer, her eyes narrowed with concentration and her cell phone between her shoulder and ear. I approached slowly, as if I didn't want to bother. When I stopped in front of the table, she didn't look up right away. "Sir, could you wait a moment? If you want, I can make an appointment," he said, still with his head down. Funny, right? A daughter who once called me a hero. Now he called me sir. When she finally recognized me, it was as if she had been given an internal fright. The smile came out crooked, too fast. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I didn't smile back. He just said, "I stopped by to see up close how he treats his customers." She was visibly disconcerted. He tried to adjust himself in his chair, changed his tone of voice, started a conversation about the weather. I stood firm. I took out of my pocket the brown paper envelope I carried from home and placed it on the table, without pushing, without haste. "You used my name to hide a debt from the DMV, without asking me. That was a mistake." She froze. She looked at the envelope as if it were a mirror that showed not only what she did, but what she was at that moment. It didn't open. He didn't. And I didn't say anything else either. I just looked, firm. The room seemed silent, though all around the phones rang, the keyboards clicked, and a coworker came in offering coffee. I didn't move. I just turned my back and left, leaving there the weight of what needed to be felt. Inside the envelope, in addition to the documents Ray had obtained, was a simple bank statement. Just 1 page. The final balance read, "Use 40,021 now, 348.12. As I drove home on the bus, her face kept popping out of my head. That mixture of fright, shame and doubt. The penny started to drop there. I saw it in her eyes. I saw the first crack in the shield of arrogance. And it wasn't just for the money. It was because she realized that she didn't know who her own father was. Deep down, I always knew I would have to look them in the eye, to say, without shouting, what no one else had the courage to show. They erased me from their lives, but now my shadow was returning. And this was just the first visit. Because after that, it was Scott's turn. And with him, my friend. Silence would not be enough. He was going to hear something he never imagined. Do you know what it was? So hold on, because the next part is going to hurt more than any extract. I entered that registry office with the calm of someone who carries his own time on his back. Each step of mine seemed to weigh more than the last, not for a doubt, but for sure. I sat in front of the table, took the cap off my head, and looked into the eyes of the girl who was going to type everything. I want to update my will. She handed me the form, and I signed it as if closing a door. A small gesture, but one that carried decades of history. In place of my children's names, I wrote another, Ellen Grayson Foundation, named after my wife, who always wanted to open a shelter for young people without families. We never managed to do it in life. Now, she was going to make it. There, in that silent registry office, I buried a cycle. The children I raised were no longer the same, and maybe, deep down, I wasn't either. But while they chose to forget who I was, I chose to remember who my wife dreamed of being. And to accomplish this on her behalf was my last promise fulfilled. I also made it clear, with the lawyer, start the formal eviction process. Nothing personal, nothing cruel, only consequence. The contracts were broken, deadlines overdue. The rules were clear, and now they would be complied with. Madison and Scott would receive the notifications not from me, but from the administrator. Because of the system that they have always protected more than their own blood, they tried to react. I received messages on my cell phone, missed calls, emails with dramatic titles. Dad, we need to talk. Please answer me. But I didn't answer. The number was still active, but the answer now was silence. It was not revenge. It was emotional justice. It was dignity. I spent years being ignored in life. Now they would need to learn to live with the absence they have built, and the lack of response would be louder than any scream. Meanwhile, the bank statement remained intact, the fortune untouched. But the ties, these were cut with a scalpel, no hatred, no scandal, just a straight line between what I was and what I became. And think with me, how many people live their entire lives waiting for a gesture of gratitude that never comes? And when it comes, sometimes it's already too late. Now the cards were all on the table, and the clock was ticking. Only this time, it was no longer their time. It was mine. But the story is not over yet. Because what did Scott do when he found out about the dump? It was something that even I didn't imagine. And there, shame turned to despair. Do you have any idea what he tried to do? So listen to what comes next, because even I was flawed. The news ran like a wind in a dry field. It didn't take long to get to them. The name Thomas Grayson printed on the official documents of ownership, stamped, signed, filed. It was no longer a secret. It was law. The mask fell off without me having to touch a finger. When the bailiff showed up at Scott's door with the eviction notice, he didn't understand at first. He thought it was a mistake, that they were confusing the address, but it only took a second page, with my full name, for everything to darken in his face. It is said that he was silent for almost 5 minutes, looking at the paper as if he saw a ghost of his own childhood. Only now an adult, fed up, and with all his bills up to date. In the same week, the company where he worked completed the audit. Falsification of receipts, invented over time, manipulated reports. He was fired for just cause, without the right to contest. I was told that he left the building with a cardboard box in his hands and his face as white as wax. The arrogance. This one stayed in the meeting room. Madison didn't escape either. The brokerage firm where he worked decided to suspend his license after the accumulation of complaints. 3 lawsuits became 5, and one of them gained space on a local legal blog with a photo of her and the title, "Luxury Seller, Truth of Plaster." He tried to defend himself. He said it was persecution, but the papers were there, cold, clear, like the water she refused to drink for dinner at my house. Both tried support. They went after their mother. Linda listened, cried, but the one who was with her was Peter, and he was in the middle of bankruptcy. Poorly managed company, debts with banks, auctioned properties. He couldn't even help himself. It was then that for the first time in many years, my children found themselves alone, not only financially, but emotionally. Alone in a void that neither Peter's money, nor the comfort of lies, nor pride could fill anymore. And I found out. Because small town has big ears. I heard it in line at the market, in the corner cafe, even in the mouth of a lady who barely knew me. "I heard what happened to your children, Mr. Grayson. What sadness." I just thanked him with a light wave and looked at the floor again. Not because it didn't hurt, but why did it hurt so much that only silence could hold? There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So, if this story is touching you, enjoy this video and subscribe here. Let's make this story reach those who need to remember that not all pain is the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a new kind of love. Fairer. That night I sat on the porch of the rented house, with a blanket on my shoulders and a restless heart. I looked up at the dark Montana sky and wondered, do they feel the weight now that I did? That of being forgotten, discarded, treated as dead weight. I had no response, but I was sure of one thing. The walls fell. And in the midst of the rubble, something was moving, a request, a look, a gesture. Can you imagine what it was that I received weeks later in a small crumpled envelope? Because that's it, that the wound began to become a scar, and it came in writing. The courtroom smelled of old wood and freshly printed paper. I sat in the last row, hat on my lap, staring at the floor of a well-waxed club. The name Scott Grayson echoed when the clerk announced the start of the hearing. He was sitting in front, his suit ill-fitted, his beard unshaven, his dark circles under his eyes. When he looked back, our eyes crossed for a second, and he lowered his. The judge, a man with a tired expression and hard eyes, asked the lawyers to present the arguments for the bankruptcy attempt. They alleged insolvency, lack of income, unfair indebtedness, and asked for immediate judicial relief. Scott's lawyer cited abusive rent, non-negotiated adjustments, and tried to paint a picture of a victim. It was then that the judge asked the question, who is the largest creditor of this real estate debt? I got up. The seat creaked slightly. I walked to the front of the room with my documents in hand. Each step seemed to mark a pace of decades. I stopped a few feet from the bench and said in a firm voice, not loudly, but firmly, "It's me." The room was muted. I felt the silence coming in through my ears, up my shoulders, down my chest. The referee arched his eyebrow. "Identify yourself." "Thomas Grayson, biological father of the defendant." I gave him the folder with the deeds, the statements, the proofs of ownership of the properties. I also included a copy of the attempted misuse of my name as credit collateral, which invalidated Scott's claim of good faith in the bankruptcy attempt. The judge flipped through the documents for a long minute. He took a deep breath. Then he looked straight at Scott and said, "Bankruptcy filing denied. Proven bad faith in the use of the name of third parties without authorization. The eviction is valid and will be executed immediately. The property belongs to Mr. Grayson. Next case." Scott tried to stand up, protest, but his voice didn't come out louder than the sound of papers being piled up. He could only repeat, "But he's my father. He is my father." Undiadus, and that's when Madison, sitting in the back, rose like a flame that refuses to go out and screamed, "You're our father! How can you do that?" I didn't answer. I just looked into her eyes for a second. There was no anger there. There was an end. I handed the last document to the bailiff and turned my back. Not a word more. No explanation. Because when the truth speaks, we hear even what we didn't want. You are the one who is with me so far. I need you to know something. The strongest moment in this story. It hasn't been that one yet. There is still a page that changed everything, one that was not planned nor calculated. It was human and unexpected. So stay with me, because what came in the mail a week later, it was the shortest and heaviest letter I have ever received in my life. The letter arrived on a Saturday morning. Small envelope, crumpled, sender without name. The address was handwritten, the handwriting shaky, as if hesitating between writing and giving up. I opened it slowly, without haste. Inside, only a sheet folded in half. I recognized the lyrics right away. It was from Madison. 3 short, direct, almost harsh sentences because they are so naked. I don't know who I am anymore. Sorry for everything. If there is ever still room left, write to me. I stared at it, as if looking at a half-open door in a dark hallway. I didn't answer. Not that day. But I kept it, because sometimes silence needs to be taught before it is broken. Meanwhile, the news arrived without me having to look for it. The 2 had been officially evicted. Photos of the properties with "For Rent" banners began to circulate on local websites. Luxury cars were towed, furniture auctioned in makeshift warehouses in the city centre. Scott attempted a legal appeal, but was denied in the first instance. With no credit, no support network, he ended up taking a job as a parcel delivery man. I saw him from afar once, getting out of a white van, box in his hands, sweat on his forehead. He passed me without seeing me, or pretended not to see it. Madison, on the other hand, fell off the radar. She learned that she was living with a friend in Boise, trying to rebuild her life away from her own name. The brokerage where she worked deleted all her photos from the site. Ads that featured his image now showed generic faces and cold phrases. Local newspapers reported the news quietly. Eviction and bankruptcy reveal name of hidden investor in Montana. No direct mention of me, but those who were from the city knew. And the neighbors started to look at me differently, not afraid, with respect. Respectful silence, short greetings on the street, invitations to coffee that never came before. And me? I still had my 2001 Impala, my worn jeans and the coffee brewed in the French press, the same way as always. But there was something in my step that had changed, a new firmness. It was not pride nor revenge. It was peace. The peace of those who did not need to raise their voices to be heard. Funny how life turns, right? The children who mocked my car now had nowhere to park their bodies. And the man they called a beggar. He walked calmly through the city, as if he had finally returned home. But calm down, there's still more. Because when everything seemed resolved, when the dust seemed to have settled, a familiar face knocked on my door. And he was not an officer. It was someone I hadn't seen in years. Do you know who it was? So hold on tight, because the reunion that came after, it was what hurt the most. And maybe the one that healed the most, too. The decision came on a windy afternoon. I looked at the empty backyard of the house I'd rented for so many years in Missoula, the same one where the leaves always piled up in the fall, and thought, it's over. I sold the house with few furniture, few objects, but full of memories that no longer belonged to me. I didn't leave a note or an explanation for anyone. I grabbed my small suitcase, the grey cardigan Linda gave me the first winter we spent together, and left without looking back. My destination, Carmel, California. A city where no one knew me. And that was exactly what I needed. The house I bought there was simple, made of light wood, with windows facing the sea. When I opened the front door, I could hear the sound of the waves crashing on the sand. The silence there didn't hurt. It was another kind of silence. one that healed, that washed. The first night I slept there, no noise of cars, no news of the children, no past knocking on the door. It was the first night in many years that I didn't have nightmares. Over time, I started to participate in a community centre in the city. Nothing big, a lounge with folding chairs, thin coffee and real smiles. I was offered a group of young people to talk about personal finances. I accepted. I used the same examples that I learned on my own, from library books and old investment magazines. I taught you how to make the first dollar work, how not to get carried away by fake shine, and more importantly, how to value what is built calmly. It was there that I met Eleanor, a widow too, kind eyes, well-combed white hair, and a light laugh that seemed to wake the walls. She taught adults to read and write, people who spent their lives working too hard to learn to read. Sometimes, after class, we would be having tea on the bench in the square, watching the sunset as if it had been made just for us. Eleanor never asked me about the past. And maybe that's why I talked to her more than I ever talked to anyone. I didn't have to explain the scars. She saw them, and he respected each one as if they were medals. And look, it was not romance. It was company. It was rest. It was that kind of silence that doesn't require words, because the heart has already understood everything. We walked together on Sunday mornings, she arm in arm with me, and sometimes she would say, "There are people who live their whole lives to be a port. But there are times when we turn into boats." And I smiled, because I understood it firsthand. One day I sat in front of the sea with my feet buried in the cold sand, and I thought, I spent my life being a base. Foundation, structure. I have always been a ground for others. But now I learned to be horizon, not to run away from what was left behind, but to understand that life goes on, even after it seems to have ended. And if you've come this far listening to all this, I want to tell you something important. Forgiveness doesn't always come with a hug. Sometimes it comes with distance, and with peace, and with a new life where you are finally respected. But does it all end anyway? Because that week, after so many months in silence, a letter arrived in the mail. The sender, Scott, and what was inside. It was the last bend in this road, the most unexpected, the hardest. Do you want to know what he wrote? So get ready. Because now it's time for truth. The sun was slowly descending that late afternoon, painting the Pacific with shades of copper and orange, and I was sitting next to Eleanor on the wooden bench that creaked a little as we settled in. The wind was salty, light, as if asking permission to touch the skin. It was at that simple moment, one of those that don't make noise, that the cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I wasn't even expecting anything. I picked it up, saw Scott's name appear on the screen, and a short sentence just below, "Dad, I'm sorry. Can we still talk?" I didn't open the message. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because at that moment I understood that my journey had already reached where it needed to go. I put the phone in my pocket and held Eleanor's hand, feeling a calm I had never known before. There was no more knot in my stomach, no more that old question hammering in my head. What happened to them followed the natural course of the choices they made. Scott continued to work, honestly this time, at simple jobs, rebuilding the day each time. Madison, after a lot of falling, went back to school, away from the spotlight and false facilities, learning again to start small. There was no grandiose reconciliation, no movie scene. There was distance. And strangely, this is what brought order. I, in turn, am fine. I wake up early, walk on the beach, drink coffee looking at the sea, help young people not to make the same mistakes I saw up close. Sometimes I teach, sometimes I just listen. I learned that listening is also a way of loving. If there's one thing this life has taught me, it's that love isn't blind insistence. Love is also a limit. The great lesson that I carry today, and that I leave for you who have heard me so far, is simple and profound at the same time. Do not fight to be accepted where you are constantly hurt. Time is too short to be spent trying to convince those who don't want to see. We can give everything, build everything, sustain everything, and yet not be valued. That doesn't diminish us. It only reveals where our place is not. When we choose our own peace, we are not abandoning anyone. He is choosing himself for the first time. And that changes everything. I really want to thank you for staying with me until the end of this long conversation, this outburst that I carried for years in silence. Your presence here is good company, one of those that warms up. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like someone who gives a tight hug, one of those who say, "I heard you." If you can, subscribe to the channel, as if accepting an invitation to come back to the next cafe, to sit down again and listen to another story. Tell me in the comments which city you are listening to me now. I like to imagine this invisible map of people connected by the same feeling, and it also activates the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story. I remain here, looking at the sea, in peace, knowing that I gave love, received contempt, and chose dignity. And peace, no one will ever take this one away from me.